I often reflect back on the monumental journey this car's taken me on, both physically and in the metaphorical sense. You see, after travelling around Australia in 2020, during the heavy outbreak of COVID, in the last leg of the journey, I found myself suffering gearbox issues in Perth. Despite only having $1,000 to my name and a total of 4,000 kilometres trip to get to Darwin through some of the hottest and remotest stretches of Australia, I decided to gamble against my odds and make one last adventure out of it. The decision to road trip and relocate to Darwin was one of the stupidest and yet the best decision I have made. Rebuilding my Range Rover didn't come lightly. After 38 years and 9 months travelling around Australia, it had sustained quite the punishment and needed some undivided attention. But in reality, a full rebuild wasn't required. I could have very easily converted to manual, put a new gearbox in it, fixed some of the rust, and got back on the road. However, the rebuild wasn't so much about the state of the car, but more a point I had to prove to myself. You see, I've always been mechanically inclined, but learning to consistently rock up every day, persevere through various challenges of making things fit and work around set parameters, whilst also maintaining financial control and time management, is an art on its own, and it was something I was desperately wanting to learn and slowly master. Through this process, I found myself very much alone, tunnel-visioned and at the brink of exhaustion after completing 3,500 hours in just under a year and a half whilst maintaining a full-time job. So, after 16 months and over 70,000 kilometres on the road, I've come to really appreciate and make the most of all the time I sacrifice bringing this build to life. And I'll tell you what, it certainly has not disappointed.
Oh, all right. Damn, I think it might be a little bit too hot here. I might have to move. All right. Oh, that is so much better. All right, so get my notepad out. I wrote down some questions that I received over social media with, I guess, what everyone wants to know from my experience, and I also dotted a couple down that I thought would also be invaluable. I broke the questions up into sort of 3 categories. One is just a sort of some generic questions. The other one's all the negative sides. And then the last one is to sort of wrap things up with the positive side. So I'll get straight into it and just start with the first one. And the first question was, how did you get into Range Rovers and where did your journey begin? This one, there's both a long and a short answer to this, and I'll try to make it as succinct as possible. But when I first came to Australia at the age of 5 with my sister, my old man had a Disco 1 with the V8 in it. It was one of the first Disco 1s. And we used to get away on adventures, get away on trips and family holidays and that thing. And I think that sort of started the journey, or it started the interest around four-wheel drives and the possibilities of being able to get away and the ability to have sort of just that freedom to go and do your own thing. it wasn't until I was around year 4 and 5, so around 11, that I started doing some work experience at the workshop that my old man used to get his Land Rover serviced at. And they had a Range Rover that came in that I was able to do a bit of work on. And straight away, I sort of loved the old school shape, but loved the big, the not so big, but the V8 in them. And after doing some work on it, and after a few holidays sort of went past, the same customer came back and eventually wanted to upgrade his Range Rover. And at the time, they weren't worth really very much then. So, and he knew that I really loved it, and that, I did some work on it and was quite enthusiastic around it. So he ended up more or less giving it to me free of charge there and then. And so from there, we took that Range Rover up to the hobby farm that we had, and pretty much learned how to drive on it, paddock bashed it around the farm, damaged it, cut the roof, you name it, I pretty much more or less did it. And yeah, unfortunately I do regret that one greatly, but I did learn a lot on that car. And since then I've had, I think this is my 7th one. So it sort of started the craze for it. And from there I've just kept going, I guess. So I guess that answers that question. The next one is, what were the first aspirations of the build? The first aspirations for the build, if you go to my first build video I did on this, I spoke at the end about wanting to travel around the world in it. And that still definitely stands today. I built it with overlanding in mind. So, which is why I went for things like the 300 TDI, went a manual option rather than the auto. And then, it's also why I went down the diesel rather than keeping it V8. So that still stands today. However, timing is another question. And since I've sort of started the business, I'm really running with that now and really want to run with that until I definitely at least get it to a certain point where I have the flexibility to maybe take a little bit more time off. But I would love to go and take this to ship it to Africa, ship it to South Africa and then travel all the way up through into Morocco, then ship it across and do Europe and eventually Southeast Asia and over in the States one day. But that's a long-term approach, and I'll definitely obviously have to break those sort of trips up along the way. It wouldn't just be one continual trip. But yes, that is predominantly why I built this thing and why I went to the vast effort to turn it into the overlander that it is today. This next question is a really good one, and it's actually a question that my mate Henry, who built the Series 2A up in Darwin alongside me, asked me, and that is, who are you grateful along the way? And now I would say probably there's 4 people that had significant impact with this car. And the order isn't really important here, but I'll start with Ty. Ty being the one that I shared the shed with. So he had that Tuscan Blue Range Rover. And when I first rocked up to Darwin, Ty was rebuilding his car. And he was just a fantastic source of knowledge right from the get-go. And he also, I was able to see the car broken down and sort of get a very quick understanding of how to attack mine. And it also gave me just the confidence to do so. Just seeing Ty, just having an absolute dig at it and doing a real clean job with it. And so Ty is definitely one of those people that I'm super grateful for. He also allowed me to move into the shed that he was renting, and he actually vacated it for a short period of time in order for me to be able to respray this in there without affecting his car. So that was something he didn't have to do, but he generously did so. And it sort of gave me the ability to sort of fast track the build, because painting was one section where I was really unsure how I was going to go and do it, because I didn't quite have the money to fund it to put it in through a spray booth. But at the same time, I really wanted a nice clean job, and I wasn't going to just do it in the backyard at home. So yeah, and I still today speak to Ty once or twice a week and keep in touch. And we've gone on, so the earlier clips you would have seen in this video all through Flinders Ranges, and I was able to, Ty invited us to be part of that trip, and I'm super grateful because that was a once in a lifetime experience, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. So yeah, Ty. The other person is Gary from G&K Electrical. He had the workshop literally just up the driveway from me. He was a great source of knowledge when it came to air conditioning and the electrical side. He also was a whiz at both TIG and MIG, so anything that I needed welded up to like a high standard, he was able to do so. And he also taught me how to actually like grasp both MIG and TIG, and it's something that I'm now really comfortable with, and I'm very grateful for him for that, actually, because it's something that it's good to have someone that knows what they're doing actually show you the ropes along the way. You just learn things so much quicker. And I guess the other person obviously would have to be Simone, and Simone is actually my housemate up in Darwin alongside with Henry. And Simone came to the build right at the end when I actually had a catastrophic engine failure just before I left Darwin with this thing. So, and this is something I didn't detail in any of the videos because the camera just didn't come out that time, because I was just so pumped with trying to get this car on the road and leave Darwin that being able to video and document the process was just, I just couldn't manage all that. But what happened was this thing had a massive bottom end failure after I got it registered. I was driving it down the street, and then all of a sudden just heard this absolute massive knock coming from the underside. Took it around to the shed, and then carried out an investigation and found out that it was a full bottom end failure. 3 days out before I was actually leaving Darwin to head down to Melbourne to do that BF Goodridge shoot that I had actually planned for 3-4 months before that. So I was pretty devastated when that happened, and I sort of sat there for a few hours like contemplating what the hell I was going to do. And it wasn't really without Simone's confidence to tackle an engine swap in that short period that, I just don't think I would have probably been able to do it. So I went around to Land Rover Darwin. Absolutely sweating my ringer off, but here's the donor motor. Doesn't look too crash at the moment, but it does have low Ks and it is actually in good condition. So we're very close to pretty much ripping this off. I've got everything all around it off. Just need to take the heater hoses and the wiring off, and then we should be able to lift this out. Lee had a second-hand 300 TDI motor with about 230,000 kilometers on the engine. Running order, totally fine. It's just been sitting there for 3-4 years. So I got a great deal on that with Lee, which I was so grateful for. And took that engine out, took it around to my shed, and then Simone and I stripped the motor out of this thing, and then went about putting them side by side and swapping all the good parts that I had put onto my original engine onto this second-hand one. And so over that 3 days, we just went absolutely to town carrying the full engine swap out on it. Set an alarm on for every 2 hours so that if we did fall asleep along the way somewhere, that we would just constantly be getting up and going. So really over those 3 days, we probably got total of 6-7 hours, and somehow managed to do the full swap, and on the last day drive down to I think I got down to Daily Water, so I did 500 Ks and then absolutely conked out. I think fell asleep at 4 p.m, woke up at 4 a.m the next morning and hit the road and made my way all the way down to Melbourne over 3 days. So Simone was an absolute godsend, and she came at a perfect time when I was pretty demotivated to carry things through. And I guess the last person would definitely have to be Henry. Henry, I rented the house in Darwin with as well. He was building his Series 2A alongside me. He also travelled around all through Queensland and Northern Territory with me in this thing, the original version. And so Henry was a great source of help when I needed that extra hand. He rented a shed around the corner, so he would just come around, give us a hand, and vice versa. And so he was just a really, really good support, really good person to have a chat to and work problems through with. And yeah, just a really, really good mate. So I'd say those 4 people would have to be the most pivotal in this whole rebuild. And obviously there's other people alongside there that definitely helped, like Lee from Land Rover Darwin definitely, and Darcy. And yeah, I could probably list whole lot more, but I'll it's one of those things where I think you realize that it's just not a one band show, and that anytime anyone's doing a rebuild like this, there's so many people in the background that are helping out, and I think that is that in itself is one of the best things about it, is that you sort of form a little community around it. Now this question's really interesting. What personality blind spots in my style did the project uncover? For anyone who knew me before I did this build would say that I would be super extroverted, would always need the company of other people to be around, and could not stand still doing the one thing for anything longer than sort of half an hour. And I think what this project really brought out was my introverted side. I find myself now spending so much more time by myself, working alone, and even going like on camping trips by myself than I have ever before. And I definitely would say I would attribute that to this project and how I went about it. And I'm actually super stoked that that quality definitely came out. The last questions in that sequence were, what are the legalities when it comes to doing a build like this? And I guess, look, whenever you have to swap the engine, do a gearbox swap, do suspension lift or a body lift, or put bigger wheels on, you're more or less going to have to jump through some sort of engineering hoop. And there are sort of exceptions. I think you're allowed to do like a 2-inch suspension lift without any significant changes there. But whenever you're putting a different engine in, or a different, you're changing the dynamics of how the car works on the road, you're going to have to do an engineering, you're going to have to get engineering certification. So with this one, there was engineering certification for engine swap, the body lift on the car, which is a 2-inch body lift. It's got a 2-inch suspension lift, and also the 33s, which are a few sizes up from the stock. So I think you can go 2 sizes up without getting getting sign off, and then anything above that you're going to have to get it engineered. So that's where we're at with this thing. So this thing's fully engineered to be on the road. I've never been pulled over by cops. I've never been harassed by them regarding the car. And I think just in general, if you sort of look at it, yes, it sits a bit high. Yes, it's got bigger tires than usual. But at the same time, I don't think it's stupid. I don't think it's like, I don't think it calls for attention in the sense of, I'm doing something illegal with it, and that it's dangerous on the road. So I sort of put that as the main reason why I haven't been harassed with it. Now we're shifting across to the sort of downsides of the build. What were some of the really low points during the rebuild, and where did you question your sanity? Now, I think I've more or less answered this one with when I had the engine failure. Now that engine was rebuilt back in New South Wales a few years before I left on the road trip. It only had about 50,000 Ks, had about, 60,000 Ks on it since the rebuild. So I was really shocked to find that it actually failed like that. I was actually quite peed off because I paid a fair bit of money for someone to rebuild it properly. And in hindsight, I think it's largely one of the main reasons why I do what I do now is because I have a difficult time trusting people to do the right thing and take pride in what they do. So I was pretty pissed off about that. However, the new engine I've got in this, I've done about 70,000 Ks since I acquired it. So it's pretty much now at 300, which seems pretty high, but anyone who knows 300, that's very early days for them. And this one runs really nicely. I service and regularly maintain it, and yeah, it's just such a sweet motor. What problems did you run into along the way, and where did you get all the necessary parts? So when it came to the rebuild, a lot of the parts I picked up from the UK. There's a whole bunch of different mobs that you can order all the parts. I mainly dealt with Famous 4, and then I also dealt with some secondhand dealers here in New South Wales, Victoria, just scattered all around Australia. Wherever I could pick things up secondhand, I usually would. It'd save a fair bit of money, but you also gives you an opportunity to refurbish them and dress them up exactly like how you want it. And since everything on this thing was more or less getting painted or done, buying secondhand wasn't really a problem as long as it was in good nick. So that's for the rebuild. I guess on the road, where do I pick up all these parts? The perks of having a 300 TDI, R380, or more or less a Disco Defender drivetrain is that there's always a secondhand one being wrecked somewhere along the way. So you can always pick up parts quite cheap. When I was up in the Cape, I had issues with the gearbox, and at the wreckers there was 2 Discos which had both 2 good automatic gearboxes in them. So I didn't end up picking one up. I just took a bit of a gamble and kept going, but I could have easily picked one up there and fitted one in there as well. So that's the perks of them, is that you can always find something secondhand. So if you are looking to do a rebuild and you are looking to tour, that's definitely a big consideration to look into. Don't just put an M57 BMW motor into yours thinking that you're going to be able to tour all around through the remotest parts and it's never going to break on you, and if it does, you're going to be able to get some parts readily, quite easily too. It's just not going to happen, and that is a big reason why I went something like the 300 TDI. Parts everywhere, it's cheap, it's easy to fix, and yeah, it just was a no-brainer really. What would you change in the approach to the build? Look, in hindsight, there really isn't too much I would change that was in my control. Obviously, my biggest thing I would say is money. If I had more money to play around with the build, I would have been able to order all the necessary parts that I needed that had a big delay. That way, I wouldn't have had to wait as long and the project wouldn't have dragged out longer than anticipated. So I think that's a big thing. If you are looking to do a rebuild, watch your cash flow and plan ahead and see where your money's going to go and how long things are going to take, because you'd hate to be getting close to needing that part and then going, oh, I don't have the money, and then having to put a huge stop on the build for that. So if you can see that something's going to take 3 months to get sorted, then order it just as you start. So in 3 months later, when you sort of want it, it's already there, ready to go. And it doesn't matter if it rocks up a bit earlier than anticipated. That's even better. As long as you got the storage space for it, that's all that sort of matters. So that's what I would have done differently. Would have had more money, but that's something I don't think we can change. So what regrets do you have with the build? You know what, the one regret I do have with the build would have to be the fuel tank in this thing. So it's a full custom fuel tank, but I played around with the shape. I didn't want it to overhang. I didn't want it to to, hug up real hard against the floor and chafe on the floor. And so I sort of compromised with the sizing, and I originally wanted roughly a 115, 120 litre tank, and it sort of worked out to be just under 100 litres. And so that has sort of cut off those longer distances on the main tank. And originally the plan was to use the 2 seal tanks that I've got as water, but I've changed that now to 1 fuel, 1 water. So I carry 40 litres onboard water with roughly, let's say, 130 litres of fuel. So distance-wise, it's still pretty efficient. I can travel in one hit through the longest stretches of Oz without having to fill up. And I can carry extra jerry cans and stuff on the roof, but I always wanted just to keep that weight as low as possible. And that was something that I probably should have looked at a little bit better. And in the current build, that's something that I've definitely incorporated and improved on. So that's, it's a lesson that I've learnt, but I've also been able to sort of sort my error out there. What does the car struggle with? Ooh. It definitely doesn't struggle off-roading. It absolutely hauls ass off-roading. There is a fear factor doing hill climbs with it. Because I've got the 2 big counterweight tyres on the back and the really heavy rear bar, it does have a tendency to want to wheel lift, even like particularly with the lockers on. So that's just something that I've gotten used to accepting and working out how to handle it. Previously, I'd have this huge fear where as soon as the thing starts lifting tyres, I'll just go, whoop, nope, we're not doing it. Back out, angle, redo it. But now I sort of just, I've found that comfort zone where it sort of sits nicely without wanting to fall back. And I'm trying not to dabble too much in that area because I hate to make a mistake and have it flip and roll down the hill. That would be an absolute catastrophic failure, but it is a different driving style that I've got that I've learned and adjusted as a result. The other thing is, I'd say towing. I've now towed 4 different cars and projects back to the workshop here with this car since it's been on the road. And it's fantastic when you're on the freeway on the open road where you can climb up to 100, 110 k's an hour. It holds that speed quite well. However, if you've got long stretches of hills or it's a very undulated road, I'd say, it definitely slows down heaps and it's got to work hard to be able to maintain a decent speed. But that's just the 300 TDI, and that's the compromise that you make with having such a mechanical, old school and reliable motor, which isn't a big capacity at all, but it's enough to get you everywhere you need and at a decent speed. What is the ride quality like and what suspension are you running? Ride quality on this thing is great. It has, after leaving Darwin, I used the old stock coils that I had originally, and they were absolutely battered from the trip around Oz. With COVID, I couldn't get a hold of a new set of coils for the love of money. Like, it was just, everyone was after one and there was such a big waiting list. So I just ended up refurbing the ones that I had, put them in. But when I got back here, built the shed, I ended up putting some Dobinsons with, so they're more or less a 300 constant in the rear, and then some uprated ones up at the front, just to cater for more. I think they're about 150 constants up front, and that gives this thing a really, really nice ride quality, particularly when it's loaded up for the big trips. I've also got airbag suspension that I've just got sitting in the shed that I'm yet to whack into this thing. So I've got some bags to put in the rear just to be able to adjust and lift them accordingly when I need a tow. It rides fine with a trailer and a car that I'm towing behind it. It sits flat, sits great, but it would be nice to just put some helper kit in there to sort of assist when things get a little bit saggy over time. I would say that more or less summarizes it. That is, I try to be as truthful with this as possible because I think it's important that for anyone who wants to do a rebuild like this, that it's good to see from start to finish how someone's gone, but at the same time, what things they might have changed and what hurdles that they crossed. So hopefully my experiences definitely pay dividends and help you guys along the way there. Now, off to the benefits. What are some of your favorite changes from Rodney version 1? I would probably have to say the emu wings would have to be one of the best changes to the build. They've given me an opportunity to access the side boxes and further storage, which has been huge. The other one would have to be probably the drawer system. I've got far more storage than I ever have before, and that has now made a big difference in keeping the whole car decluttered. And God, it's a bit hard to think about it now. I think about it. The manual swap. I used to have so much trouble with the old automatic gearbox, and now it's just like no issues whatsoever. Jump in, it never overheats. I never have to worry about the temps up the hills. It's nice to be able to actually drive a manual again. I thoroughly miss that. I did enjoy having the auto around the city, but then again, I'm not in the city that much these days, so it doesn't faze me one bit at all. And it just turns it into a more enjoyable car, I guess. The other one is the lights on the roof. They're huge. I use them so regularly whenever I'm going camping, being able to flood the side of the roads when I'm out in the outback, be able to see kangaroos and stuff coming from a mile away, being able to back and see where I'm going late at nights with clarity, being able to shine and show everyone around the campsite and identify the spot that we want to camp on the drive, like whilst on the fly whilst we're driving, is a really good one. Yeah, and just the general, just having a car that I get to look back at every single day or turn around every time I close the door and walk away from it and be proud of. I guess that's something that I thoroughly enjoy about it. There's a lot to be said in having a crack and doing something your own, and then being able to see the benefits of your labour, I guess. Yeah. Anyways, I hope that gives you guys a good summary of the build. And it's more or less a wrap up on this thing. Aside from trips, maybe any modifications that I do, there won't really be too many videos about this thing. If I have missed anything that you guys want to know, just shoot it in the comment and I will get back to you guys on it. Anyways, I will wrap this thing up and get going. Appreciate your time. Cheers, guys.